If you're over the age of 50, I think it's time to be realistic. You're probably not getting hired. Now, that's obviously not true. There's lots of people over the age of 50 who are landing great opportunities and moving along with their careers just fine. But there are a lot of people who have been thrust into unexpected job searches who are in the final third of their career who are experiencing a lot of difficulty getting that phone to ring. And a lot of people that I speak to in my career coaching who are 50s and 60s are experiencing a bias in the workplace. And I want to dive into why the bias exists and maybe some things that you can do if you're in this situation to hopefully get the phone to start ringing again and try to continue on with your career and hopefully get to the finish line. So why is it so difficult to get a job in your 50s and 60s? Some people even argue potentially even your 40s. Now, of course, the modern workplace isn't making this any easier, where companies are only focused on the next quarterly earnings call and whether or not they're going to be profitable because their bonuses and their job security are tied to it as well. And unfortunately, people who are in the tail end of their career are indeed subjected to more layoffs than people who are earlier in their career. Of course, AI is coming in and disrupting things as well. In some cases, jobs are being replaced by AI chatbots, and in other cases, AI in the hiring process makes things much more difficult. But the opponents will say AI is designed to take away the bias in the hiring process because your resume is guaranteed to be looked at. But for a lot of people who are later on in their career, they may have some things on their resume that automatically put them in that no bucket. Can't confirm or deny it, but the perception is real, and sometimes it really does feel like that's the case. And I think we have to look at the elephant in the room of what biases do employers have toward older employees. And I want to put a little disclaimer here and say, these biases are not something that I share, but nonetheless, I'm pointing them out because I think we do need to address them. But there is a perception that older workers are often out of touch. Their skills may have atrophied, or they may be a little bit behind the times, kind of this concept of the old dinosaur sitting in the corner. And oftentimes culturally, these organizations who are moving at a breakneck pace look at these older workers as not being able to keep up with the changes in the modern workplace. And let's face it, skill atrophy is a real thing. If an employee spends a long time in a specific role in a specific organization, the whole thing about steady job is bad for your career. Oftentimes, they're not looking for the latest and the greatest of what's going on in the market. And when an employer is creating a layoff list, unfortunately, that's some of the stuff that they're looking at. And an employee who has spent a long time in a particular role and hasn't really paid much attention to the job market beyond it could find themselves on the outside looking in. Now, of course, that's not a blanket statement. There's lots of people who are in their 50s and 60s who have kept very cutting edge with their skills. But the perception from employers tends to bias in that direction. And another very real issue that older workers tend to face is wage inflation. And basically what this is your skills remain relatively static to your peer group or the people who are coming in behind you. And in fact, in a lot of cases, the people coming in behind you may have a more current version of the skill that you've kind of made your career out of. And over time, you're making more money through a series of merit increases, maybe some small promotions, but the amount of money that you're being paid versus the person who's coming in at entry level or near entry level is generally going to be equalized at some point in time. In other words, there's going to be a crossover of productivity and skill set versus wage. There are some people who are later in their career who are making a lot more money, but not necessarily producing that much more output. And so those are people, unfortunately, that get circled on a list. And that presents a very difficult dilemma for people who may have had wages inflate to a point where the market no longer supports it. And now they're faced with either taking massive pay cuts for the same work or potentially even going into a lower level job. If those lower level jobs will even call them for an interview, because they'll look at them and say, well, you're overqualified. So then it becomes kind of a massive catch-22 in this regard. And another potential bias that I think we need to point out is that an older worker who is in a similar career type for a long period of time could be perceived as a known commodity. And what I mean by that is if you're somebody that has stayed in a similar level for a long period of time, employer bias starts to suggest that that's who you are. You're not capable of anything beyond that. And I've heard hiring managers in the past make comments saying, we just don't see a future growth potential for this person. And basically what that is subtle ageism. But the thing is that if that hiring manager's job doesn't have a clear career path beyond that particular role, how can they justify not hiring the older worker because of that reason? But nonetheless, they'll consider them old dog, no new tricks, and that can be a very difficult dilemma for the older worker to get around too. And then, of course, talked about the dangers of reverse mobility. Now you're an older worker, you've achieved a certain level of compensation, a certain level of responsibility, a certain job title, and now they're faced with the idea of reverse mobility. And an employer might look at that as a potential risk. They'll say, this person is clearly overqualified for my lower level position, so I'm not going to contact them because I think that they're not going to be satisfied in this role. So in other words, they're projecting it onto the older worker and they're eliminating them based on what they feel is going to be a mismatch. Now, the older worker, to their dismay, is saying, hey, listen, I'll take that job. I don't have a problem moving down in responsibility. In fact, I may even welcome it. But the employer will often not even give them a chance because they feel like they're likely going to be a flight risk. And that's what reverse mobility is all about. So the problem is for people who are 50 plus, they can't get the phone to ring. So they're faced with a really serious dilemma of what do I do about retirement? They start dipping into their 401k and savings, and that starts to cannibalize. And it can become a very vicious cycle very quickly if they're not careful. That's why oftentimes you'll see a lot of older folks who end up starting consulting businesses because they take their expertise and that's probably the best option for them. And honestly, it's not a bad route. But the problem is that the workforce is aging, and in the next 10 years, you're going to see this even more amplified. So are we going to be faced with an economy full of consultants? Who knows? Based on how AI is going, maybe that will be the case. But if I was in a situation where I was trying to combat it myself, there's really only a few options that you have. The first one is going to be creating a defensive resume. And what I mean by defensive resume is a resume that is designed to try to minimize the impact of age and hopefully allow employers to see my skill and not use age bias against me. So I'm going to be removing dates for things that are not critical, like education. I might even scrub some of the dates from my older employment and maybe move that into an other relevant experience section just with no dates at all. And I may want to get rid of some of that obsolete technology and potentially even remove the company that no longer exists and hasn't existed for the last 25 or 30 years. And I also might want to consider shortening my resume up to show only the last 10, maybe 15, possibly 20 years of my experience, and therefore minimizing the impact of ageism, at least at the application level. Second thing I'd be doing is absolutely leaning into my networks. And hopefully at this point in your career, you have some deep networking connections to lean on, but I would also be leveraging targeted networking. I'd be connecting with potential hiring managers for my target companies and really trying to get myself to be more visible in my career verticals, because that's the best thing that you can do no matter what part of your career you're in. And more importantly than just having these connections is actually nurturing them. So I would get out, hit the pavement, get really well known in my local market, and make sure people know my name. Even if you have a job today and you're watching this just more out of curiosity, it is always worth looking at what's going on in your job vertical or your open market. And if you haven't looked for a new job in a few years, you may want to just pay attention to what's going on job postings and see what disruptive technology is coming out and see what the market is starting to demand. And if you're smart, you probably want to get in front of some of them and try to get them on your resume in some creative manner, because you don't want to find yourself on the outside looking in if you find yourself in an unwanted or unwelcome job search. And I know this one gets a lot of flack and I just don't understand it, but the older you get in your career, the more critical multiple streams of income become, because in this situation where you are not able to replace your income, you have to accept a job at a lower rate of pay, or maybe you have to start a contracting business where work isn't steady. Having a secondary or potentially third income stream that can help you pay your bills will keep you away from tapping into those 401ks and will allow you to get to retirement much more comfortably. So therefore, I can't overemphasize the importance of multiple streams of income in everybody's career path, but in particular people who are entering into the final third of their career. You have to protect yourself in this case. So that's what I would do if I was in this situation. And unfortunately, it's not an easy dilemma to solve, but it can be solved if you implement career strategy as early into your career as possible. If you're somebody that's in the later part of your career and you're experiencing this and you're saying, gosh, there's just no way for me to get back into the workplace. I'm doing everything and I'm just not having any success. These are some of the things that I would try. But if you find yourself really in dire straits and you need more help, that's actually something that I specialize in. I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with tips and tricks, all from a recruiting perspective. And I share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. And the first one is called Resume Rocketfuel, which is designed to teach you how to write those resumes that are going to get recruiters to hopefully look beyond the age-related issues and get you into the interview process. And so if you don't know how to write a good, solid, targeted, strategic, and potentially even defensive resume, then you want to check out Resume Rocketfuel. But once you get beyond that and you get into the interview process, the employer is likely going to see your age because you're going to be on a video call with them or you're going to be sitting face-to-face. So then it becomes much more important to have an interview strategy. You can't just go in there and wing it and expect for things to go well. So I created a course called the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp, which takes you from job search all the way through each round of the interview process, giving you tips and deep strategy on how to ace each round to ultimately get you to the job offer. And then hopefully we can negotiate a good offer for you that you're not leaving any money on the table and hopefully can make you whole or even give you a potential raise. But skipping the recruiter is of utmost importance here because you have to get beyond the gatekeepers and get into the interview processes with the decision makers. And that's where unlocking LinkedIn comes in. You have to leverage those tools to show a clear fit that you have the ability to do the job, even if the resume is potentially holding you back. And networking is going to be key here. So if you're not really sure how to network effectively and how to leverage the LinkedIn tool to your advantage, check out Unlocking LinkedIn. And if you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, career strategy becomes crucially important because if you do the right things early on, you take the right steps, you know exactly what it is that you're doing, you can hopefully avoid some of the issues that you might experience if you have a career disruption in your 50s and 60s. Trust me, it's a lot easier to solve things when it's early in your career and we can make some adjustments back then, but you have to know where you're heading, and that's where a career strategy becomes place. So I created a course called the Ultimate Career Blueprint to teach you exactly how to map out your career with the highest degree of strength. So check those courses out if you think you need more help. So that's why it's so difficult for people in their 50s and 60s to find a new job. But the good news is people are still finding great roles at high levels of pay with very respectable employers. It just requires a little bit of effort and a little bit of strategy, and that's what I'm here for. So appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.